Hello, welcome to PCAP's 7th Prairie's Got the Goods Week. My name is Caitlin Rose Seiler, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Today, Stacey Domolewski will be speaking about the Beef Cattle Research Council, cattle, plant, and environment research on the prairies. I'd like to start by stating we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I'd like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. Before we get going, I'd like to mention there are 5 other webinars happening this week for Prairie's Got the Goods Week. Topics include wetlands, biodiversity, wild food, pollination, and carbon credits. You can register for these webinars on the PCAP website. Just click on upcoming events and then Prairie's Got the Goods Week. All past webinar presentations can be found on the PCAP YouTube channel, and this webinar will be uploaded there in the near future. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type it into the questions section of the webinar dashboard. And if you're on the cell phone app, just send your question by chat to the organizer, and questions will be answered towards the end of the webinar. I'd like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by our presenting sponsors, Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association and Wildlife Habitat Canada. Our supporting sponsor is Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, and in-kind support has been provided by the Beef Cattle Research Council. So without further ado, today's presenter, Stacey, is a research and innovation coordinator with the Beef Cattle Research Council. She grew up on a cow-calf operation in Taber, Alberta, and got both her bachelor's and master's of animal science at the university. At the Beef Cattle Research Council, Stacey works primarily in the areas of forage, environment, and cattle feeding and feed grains. In a nutshell, her job is to help explain research to beef producers and explain beef production to researchers. Stacey lives on a grain farm north of Maple Creek and enjoys photography, teaching yoga, and gardening in her spare time. So with that, I will pass it over.
Thank you. We'll just get things started here. There we go. Are you seeing the right screen there?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started here. So as mentioned, my name is Stacey Domolewski. I'm a research and innovation coordinator for the Beef Cattle Research Council. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the BCRC, who we are, what we do, as well as some research and information that might be valuable for some of the producers, but also some of the others on the call here today. So as mentioned, I'm in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan. This is the view out my front door right now. So very cold and snowy here. We do have sunshine today, which is great. But I am looking forward to the day when my view looks like this again. So as mentioned, I grew up on a cow-calf operation, and that's really where my love of native prairie came from. This picture was the only one I could find. I'm the one in the very stylish hat. But my uncle's pasture in his native grassland was really where I fell in love with this landscape. Went to university, as I said, and then came back and I'm enjoying being back on a farm and helping out my parents wherever I can. And I had to throw in a crocus picture because, once again, just really looking forward to spring over here. So who is the BCRC? We are Canada's national industry-led funding agency for beef, cattle, and forage research and extension. So what we do is we help to prioritize, fund, and communicate about research with the greatest potential to improve competitiveness and sustainability of our beef industry. So I'm going to go into depth a bit more into what that means. We cover a number of priority areas you can see in the top here, and I will go into depth about those. And then the BCRC is guided by a producer council, so a board of producers from across Canada who are ultimately the people making the final decisions on beef research funding. So how are we funded? For the producers on the call, every time an animal is marketed, A checkoff is collected. So there is a provincial checkoff that goes towards provincial initiatives as well as towards the Canadian Cattle Association for any type of advocacy, policy work, that sort of thing. And then the national checkoff is collected as well. So that's $2.50 for any animal marketed, and that goes towards marketing and promotion. So that's with Canada Beef, the public and stakeholder engagement group, so doing some of that consumer facing work, and then us at the Beef Cattle Research Council, and that goes towards research. So how do we use those dollars? What we try to do is for every quarter we receive, we try to leverage it against other research opportunities. So whether that be government funding or other funding agencies, to increase the value of that dollar for producers. So this is just a bit of a snapshot of our current research funding portfolio, funding research at 37 universities, 6 Ag Canada locations. We've got well over 100 projects in process. So this is a little bit outdated here, but then we're working with a number of different partner funding agencies as well to get these projects out the door. So trying to ultimately make the best use of those producer dollars that are received. As I mentioned, the BCRC is producer-led, and that means that these people you see here are the ones making the final decisions on how research is funded. And so what's really great is working with this council. These people are so incredibly engaged. They're so excited to learn about new research, new projects, things that can help them on their operation, but also some of that broader view, kind of public trust or more, better understanding the industry, things that might not make a immediate impact on their operation, but have long-term results or long-term consequences. So things like carbon sequestration and better understanding soil health, those types of things. This just outlines our funding portfolio. So as you can see, we fund in a variety of different areas across the animal chain. So I like to say we start with the forage and the feed and all the way up to beef quality and food safety. So funding in a number of these areas. As you can see, forage and grassland and animal health are our two primary funding areas, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is research capacity in those areas, but also those are perhaps the areas of the most economic consequences to producers. So we do cover this portfolio. We try to avoid, funding all in one area or another. We want this balanced portfolio. And a few other things to note on here is we do administer the beef verified beef production plus program. I'm not going to talk about that today, but if you are interested in that as a producer, you can always look up VBP. They've got lots of great resources on their site as well. We do some funding in terms of research capacity, so funding researchers and funding research positions, which I'll talk about a little later. And then, of course, we have a tech transfer initiative within our budget as well. So once this research is funded, finding ways to get it out to producers in useful and meaningful ways. I'm nerdy. I like reading science journals. I realize not a lot of people do. And so how do we understand, how do we get research into your hands in a way that's actually digestible? So for today, I'm going to talk in these main areas, talk about a little bit of our research funded on the forage and environment side of things. I thought that's probably most relevant to this group, as well as resources we have available, and then some of the research capacity funding. So the first thing I wanted to mention is last year we did do a bit of a revamp of our website. So gave it a bit of a facelift. Beefresearch.ca is where you can find information on almost everything I'm going to talk about today. So if you're looking on your computer, you can use your phone to use that little QR code or type in beefresearch.ca and find the resources that I'm going to chat about today. The first thing I was asked to talk about is our 5-year Canadian beef research and technology transfer strategy. So this serves a number of purposes. The first is we recognize that we have limited funding. We can't invest in everything. And so being more strategic and more efficient with that limited funding, understanding where the gaps in research are and where the priorities are for industry. As I said, it helps us to ensure that portfolio, so we're investing across concerns across the industry, not just dogpiling in one area, and then ultimately helping us to utilize producer checkoff to leverage and get other funding. The thing to note about this strategy is, yes, our logo was on it. Yes, we help to develop this strategy. We organize the process, but it is very much an industry-wide strategy. So and I will go through kind of how it's developed, but we have input from numerous producers, from industry, from NGOs, from other groups that share common interests with beef producers. So how we start this process, you already saw the little flow chart or the little pie chart there, but we fund in a number of different areas. So we kind of keep those front and center when we're starting this process of strategy development. And then also we have to keep in mind kind of the larger pillars of what we're trying to achieve here. So obviously having consumer confidence and demand for beef is at the forefront. If we're not selling beef, producers aren't profitable, obviously. Maintaining that public trust and the public recognition of the positives of beef production. And then of course the economic sustainability and production efficiencies, because ultimately, you know, as I said before, if producers aren't making money, they're unable to stay in the business. So those are kind of the pillars that we start with going into this strategy. The next thing we look at about 2020, so the Canadian beef industry developed these 2030 goals. So these are quite ambitious goals. They were developed with input across the industry. And the idea here is to set these ambitious goals and targets for the industry. And so, you know, maintaining the 35 million acres of native grass in the care of beef producers, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 33%, a number of different goals here. So some of these are just a matter of, and I say just like it's an easy thing, but some of these are a matter of communication, of extension, of sharing the resources that we already know. Some of these, to achieve the goals, we actually need research and science to better understand how we get there. And so that's where we start with the development of the strategy is, are there areas in these goals that we need to better understand? So how do we do that? Well, there are a number of producer surveys going on across Canada. So the Western Canadian Cow-Calf Survey, there's a Saskatchewan or Cow-Calf Cost of Production Network. There is the Northern Cow-Calf Profitability in Quebec and Ontario, the Atlantic Cow-Calf Survey. So what all these do is we rolled them all up into what we call our adoption rates of recommended practices report. And so what this does is it looks across the industry at a number of different what we call best practices. And so anything from providing pain management to calves all the way up to, you know, vaccination rates, grazing management practices, maybe fencing off watering facilities, that sort of thing. And we're looking at those practices across the board and seeing, you know, what are the rates across Canada and how those, and if we're seeing gaps in certain areas, or if there's perhaps research gaps and why people are choosing to or not do these practices. So that goes into the process. So once we develop kind of the initial indicators of the survey, and this is a 5-year process, so we do it once every 5 years, we went out with a survey. And so this was open to anybody, any type of industry stakeholders. We sent out this research priority areas survey. So we had over almost 1,000 participants. So they represented researchers, funders, extension staff, and a whole lot of producers were in that survey, kind of trying to identify what the goals were and what the research strategy should look like. From there, we narrowed that down a bit more and we held focus groups so that represented a cross section of the industry. We learned very early on that having the vets sit in a room and argue if animal health was a bigger priority than some of the grazing and forage research people just didn't make sense. And so we held focus groups that were specific to those kind of broader pillars that we fund within, and had those people help us to refine what those, all of that information we'd received from the survey. So when I say that this is a national strategy, it really is, collaboration across industry. A number of groups have really gone into providing feedback and helping to develop what the industry's goals are for research and tech transfer. So what does that look like once you open it up? It has a number of goals. I'm just sharing some of the forage and environment one here, but we have these high level outcomes and then drilling down into what the actual research priorities are and some of the more tangible things. So ideally producers are able to look at, or researchers are able to look at this and say, oh, here's where I fit in, here's how I can help with research that benefits the industry. The one in particular I thought was worth showing this group is the forage and grassland productivity outcome 1, which is around improving the management and productivity of native naturalized pastures to enhance profitability and discourage land conversion. So I think a goal of this group for sure. We do identify both research priorities as well as extension priorities. So those research priorities being things that we actually need to understand better, and then extension priorities, things that we might already understand but just need to help communicate better. So the research priorities divided into 2 groups, one around identifying practices that optimize resilience and of pastures, especially including recovery times. Some of these, we have some of these general rules when it comes to grazing management, take half, leave half, being one of them, but we don't necessarily understand how those relate to native prairie. There's a lot of producers out there doing a really great job managing native prairie, but some of this data is perhaps a little lacking. And so hoping to collect some of that, as well as better understand some cost-effective strategies to avoid invasive plant species getting into rangeland. And then the extension priorities around promoting grazing practices and grazing management that optimize the productivity of these native plant species, and ultimately, and then best management practices to avoid and control the invasive plant side again. So those are particularly our native prairie goals. We've got some work in there. I'm not going to touch on a lot of it today just because it's in the very beginning stages, so there's not a ton I can tell you, but this is definitely a priority area within the industry. So as I mentioned, I am going to go into a couple projects just to give you an example of some of the work we're funding. This is a very small snippet of what we have going on, but you can always go to our website to find out kind of the ongoing activities within the BCRC. So the first thing I want to start on is this little pie slice of environmental sustainability. The project I'm going to share with you today is called a regionalized life cycle impact assessment model for the quantification of Canadian beef production impacts on biodiversity. Okay, what does that actually mean for you guys? So this was a project, there are a number of activities going on within this project. I'm going to share some of the biodiversity specific information, but it's led by Dr. Tim McAllister and his colleagues out of Lethbridge. And what they're trying to do is model the impacts of having cattle on the landscapes and how that impacts biodiversity on a number of species. So the first thing I will say is this data, this information is super granular. You probably can't see all the little names and numbers. I definitely can't. That's not really important. What I will do is give you kind of the high level, what the red represents. So along the side, it's talking about number, along the left-hand side, what it's sharing is the type of operation. So whether that's a feedlot, a cow-calf, a packer, anything within the beef industry. And along the top, what it's sharing is impact on different species. So that could be birds, mammals, soil mites, a number of different things. The red is showing impact. And what's important to recognize is that this isn't necessarily positive or negative. It's just showing that those types of things have an impact on biodiversity. It changes biodiversity by having cattle on the landscape. So it could be positive, it could be negative. They're finding some interesting facts. You know, I think the first thing they're finding is pretty logical to us. The more intensive the livestock system, so if that's a feedlot or, you know, pen-based system, it has more of an impact on biodiversity. I think we all understand that. More intensive, for plants and soil mites, the impact tends to be a bit more negative, which also makes sense. You know, animals are eating plants, that is changing their biodiversity. Now that being said, it doesn't mean they don't come back, but just as a screenshot in time. And then birds and mammals, the impact tended to be a bit more neutral, or in some cases even having a small positive impact. So for beef production, and then beef production practices associated with extensive beef management, so that could be cow-calf, backgrounding on pasture, things where animals are grazing the landscape, they showed less or no impacts on the majority of studied species, and even small positive impacts on different species. And so I think this is important to recognize, because the thing we talk about frequently is the trade-offs, right? The ideal habitat for one species isn't the ideal habitat for another. And so recognizing no matter what you do, there's going to be impacts on something. But overall, there's a lot of white or neutral impacts here, which is, you know, ideal situation. This is all done in Alberta. I believe this group is expanding the work outside of Alberta, but they started it in Alberta as a case study. This is the one that was most, I don't want to say exciting, because it's definitely not exciting work, but it was most impactful for me out of this study. So they were looking at, you know, on the left is grazing lands protected, so we kept grazing the way it was. And on the right-hand side, they're showing if they modeled if the grazing land was converted to crops. And so if you look at this map, the yellow shows wildlife density. So we're seeing these wildlife corridors through southern Alberta start to disappear if we start to convert that to cropland. We're not seeing a huge change in the north or the Rocky Mountains. That's a little bit self-explanatory, just being that there's obviously, you're not going to farm the Rocky Mountains. It's a little bit tricky. So they're modeling kind of if what the grassland that could be converted is converted, what those impacts would be on wildlife, shifting those wildlife corridors. And I think this has a pretty big impact when you see these two graphs side by side. So if you're wanting to learn more about this project, you can look it up on our website. We do have a fact sheet for every single project we have on the go. There's a little Dino QR code if you want to follow that. The thing to keep in mind with this one is, you can see at the bottom, I've got in progress, results expected in March 2023. So we're just getting these reports in right now. So what this fact sheet will look like right now is a description of what they plan to do. Not necessarily, it won't show the results yet, but if you stay tuned in a few months, we'll have the full results up on the website. Next, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a project within the forage and grassland productivity. pillar. And so this is a big project entitled Development of Native and Tame Forage Varieties and Mixtures for Improved Forage and Environmental Productivity and Resilience. So this was work originally started by Mike Schellenberg at the Swift Current Research Station. Since his retirement, Jillian Baynard has taken over the project. And it is mostly a breeding project, but they're also looking at some management of new and different forage varieties. Dr. Sean Asland down in Swift Current is doing some work around breeding native forages. So that's a part of this project. Because often the issues that we hear when we talk to producers or anybody that's invested in native seed is the price is quite large. And part of that is seed availability. So we hear frequently that a lot of these varieties have low seed counts, making them more expensive. So what this group is doing, among other things, is working to improve the production and seed production in Plains rough fescue, side oats grama, purple and white prairie clover, as well as winter fat. So once again, that information's on our website, and that's in this pool of work that's just finishing up now. So we'll have more information on it in the coming months, but they are making progress. Plant breeding is a lot less exciting than some of this other work, just because it is tend to be very slow progress. But there is some exciting results coming out of that project that should be available in the next little bit. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about research capacity. And in order to kind of get that, ideally, we check all the boxes in that research strategy off. We need to have researchers in place. And we do have some amazing researchers across Canada doing really great work in terms of beef production, forage, that sort of thing. But the industry has noticed some gaps. And so that was where this capacity funding is directed. So it's actually paying for a portion of the position at a university institution. And one of the things that does give us the ability to do as well is most times extension, KTT, communicating with producers isn't necessarily part of a researcher's mandate in their job. A lot of them do it because that's what they enjoy. But they don't necessarily, it's not necessarily technically part of their job. And so when we fund chair positions, we get to ensure that that KTT is in their job description, which is exciting. So the two that I wanted to draw your attention to at this group is the BCRC Hayes Chair in Beef Production Systems. So Stacey De Silva, she's doing some amazing work in Edmonton. She's been there, I believe, about a year now. Doing work on, some grazing work and work across the beef production cycle. The other one is a newer hire, but Bree Kellen at the University of Saskatchewan. She's the Beef Industry Integrated Forage Management and Utilization Chair. The exciting part for me is part of her mandate is around native forage work. And I was just talking with Bree last week. She does have some really exciting plans for some of that native forage management type of work. And then finally, I thought I would share with you guys some of the resources that we do have online and available through our tech transfer side of things. So as I mentioned, our website, beefresearch.ca, it's still new and exciting to us. So make sure you check that out. Everything I'm going to share here, I am going to try to include the little QR code just so you can follow along, but you can find it all on beefresearch.ca as well. The first thing I wanted to share is that we do have a webinar series as well. So those are in the evenings. We usually try to pair a producer with a researcher or industry expert. So you kind of get the practical as well as the applied side of things for both. This is our last one for the year, is going to be in March, and it's on improving data collection. One of the things we continually hear, whether it's about forage and grazing or animal health, is improving your records helps you to be able to make better decisions on your operation. And I think, that's kind of across the board. You can't manage what you can't measure. So excited for this one coming up at the end of March. We also have this section on our website called posts. This is, it used to be called our blog. We heard some people didn't understand or thought the blog might have been kind of outdated, which isn't necessarily what the goal is. The goal with these are to be really current and relevant posts towards what is going on at the moment. So they are often producer perspectives, providing research results, that sort of thing. A few of our most recent ones that I just pulled really quickly before this presentation. So the BCRC is celebrating 25 years this year, which is really exciting for us and has provided us this opportunity to kind of look back over 25 years and see how the industry has shifted and how research has changed and practices have changed. So we did the first in a series of looking back over 25 years of extended grazing. The next one that I'm sharing there, the Canadian Cow-Calf Cost of Production Network. So this is a group that they collected data from producers across a couple of years, looking at their farm economics and then modeling out what would happen if they made changes on their operation. And so sharing some of that data from there. So that's really neat. You can see, I think one of the scenarios specifically is fencing off those watering dugouts or riparian areas, things like that, and what the economic benefit is to the operation. And then of course, I know a lot of you on this call aren't necessarily producers, but we do have a ton of calving resources for the producers on the line that may be doing that right now or getting ready to do that coming into the spring. Lots of great information on, decision trees, when do you call your vet, what calf resuscitation techniques, just kind of some of the basics or even checklists of things to have on hand. We also have our newsletter, The Wire. So once again, this is quite calving and bull selection heavy. This goes out once a month. And so if you don't want to get, a email every time we publish a post, this is kind of a monthly roundup, as well as some past information that might be valuable to you. So we try to do these kind of, they're seasonal. So of course, calving and bull selection is coming to the top of the list at this time of year, but don't be worried, come summertime, this thing is jam-packed full of forage and breeding, or forage and grazing, that sort of information. And then, sorry, I should have had that up sooner, but you can of course subscribe to that on our website as well. This is a new initiative that we're doing. So if there's any extension or people who work in extension on the call that aren't a member of the beef production or the Canadian cow-calf, the Canadian Beef Truck Transfer Network. So this is just a group we meet once a year, but there's also kind of an online chat room forum where extension agents can share resources with each other or bounce ideas off of each other. It's really getting its legs under it, which is really exciting. And we just have started now through BCRC, we administer the newsletter for this group. And so what this is meant to be is if there are any extension people on the call and you do want to get on the newsletter or a part of the network, feel free to reach out. We can add you in. And so we send this newsletter out kind of quarterly with the idea being, here's some resources for things you might be dealing with producers you're interacting with, as well as tips from other extension agents. And so, it's definitely not just from us at BCRC. There's lots of, we talk about, what are certain extension agents listening to in terms of a podcast, or what did they find a really cool app or things like that. And so sharing those resources amongst a broader group. Of course, we have podcasts on here. The one I wanted to draw attention to this group, if you're not already, these are our podcasts that are funded through the BCRC. Cows on the Planet is really interesting. It's meant for the general public. It's a couple of researchers that talk about kind of debunking myths within the beef industry. And there's some really cool content on there. And then of course, for producers, so this is where we keep all of our kind of overall topic pages or kind of general roundup of science and information for producers. So every one of them has kind of this overview, so you can table of contents, you can quickly skip to where you want to go. They have the key points, so if you don't want to read through, this is the environmental footprint of beef production page, so you know the things you need to know. Since in the past 30 years, production has used 17% less water, so those quick facts. We've also got, you can dig into it more, there's tons of information, but on related research that's being funded, other posts to direct you to. Most have some form of video education, as well as some graphics and content that, and even photo content of some of these factoids I've been sharing throughout are on most pages. So that was a little more, I would say, general public geared at. Of course, we do have the really specific producer content as well. So extended grazing is a perfect example of that information for producers. And finally, I just wanted to take you through a couple of our tools and calculators we have on our website. So they're under this tools and calculators portion. The first one I wanted to share with you is this forage U-pick tool. It's one of my absolute favorites. It's super easy to use. When you click on that link, it takes you to this page. Now, this was originally a CD by the Saskatchewan Forage Association. And as most of you probably don't have a computer that plays a CD anymore, this was a way of updating it. So a number of groups got together to build this update. So I'm just going to walk you through kind of what it looks like as you use this tool. So the first thing, if you click on this forage suited to my field, I'm in Saskatchewan, I'm in the brown soil zone, and then it brings you up kind of a list of desires for what you want this plant to achieve. So this scrolls down, there's a number of things here. The thing I would encourage you, if you are using this tool, is don't click something in every one of these, because it's going to limit your ability. Instead, pick 1 to 3 of things that are really important to you and that you want to select around, and then look at what's available. So for an example, I put in that I wanted to use this forage in the fall. I wanted it to be a native species, and we have sandy soil in this area. So what this does then is it spits out a number of forages that might be suitable for my situation. And so the ones that aren't grayed out, those are the ones to look at. It also does have legumes as well. I just couldn't fit that all on one screen without it being hard to look at. So if you click on any one specific forage, it brings up kind of this quick facts about them. And then you can always click to learn more, get more information on them, as well as use this seeding rate calculator. I'm not going to go into that too in depth. It's pretty self-explanatory. It helps you calculate what seed rate you might be using. The other thing that's interesting within this tool is the forage weed management component. So if you look at this, the first thing it takes you to is a number of apps and websites that will help you with weed ID and understanding, what weeds are where. And then of course, looking more into your specific soil zone and what you might be finding there, and then information on those specific varieties. So that's the forage U-pick tool. It's one of my favorites, but this one might be my actual favorite that I'm going to share with you now, is the carrying capacity calculator. So the thing I would recommend, and I didn't say it on the last, well, I don't think there is one for the last one, but is hit the use the calculator button, not the download button. The use the calculator takes you to the web version. The web version is a lot more user-friendly and it's updated more frequently. That being said, if you have terrible internet or out in the field and want something you can bring with you, choose the download option, and that will provide you basically an Excel document with the same information. Like I said, it's a bit less user-friendly, and it's less updated less frequently, and so just keeping those things in mind if you are going to use it. So when you do go to this first page, it does share a number of resources around forage requirements, calculating them, animal units, equivalents, how to figure out kind of cows on stocking density, that sort of thing. So the first tool, and this is really small, but I do encourage you to play around with it if you're a producer or someone who is calculating those stocking rates and densities. The first option, what it does is allow you to use regional information to make a guess of what is available on your farm. So using some kind of metrics, you can decide, what is your fertility program, what kinds of plants are available, what is the potential yield, those types of things. And by selecting and inputting them into this tool, it starts to give you some information you can use. And so, total animal unit months, and then ultimately, how many animals can I run on that one piece of grass? And so helping you to calculate some of those things to better understand your forage utilization and that carrying capacity. Now, if you really want to nerd out about this, there is the method number 2. So this is kind of, you get to be a scientist. If you went to grad school like me and are sick of weighing and drying forages, number 2 is not for you. But what it does is it walks you through how to take actual measurements of what is available in your field at home. And so going out there with your hula hoop or whatever it is to measure a certain quantity of forage, cutting that, just drying it down in your microwave so no special equipment is needed. And then you put the actual numbers in rather than just those guesses based off of what is normal in your area. And it spits out the same information as the last one. And so helping you to figure out that carrying capacity on your operation. Oh, there we go. And finally, the last thing I'll share with you is, of course, to subscribe to our website. So if any of the information here you found useful or valuable, you'd like to learn more, of course, check it out or subscribe online. The more information you tell us about you, the more we can tailor our resources. So all of our research calls only go out to people entitled researcher, just because as a producer, you probably don't care that we have a call for research proposals, things like that. And yeah, I just encourage you to visit beefresearch.ca. There is a ton of information. I know I kind of jumped all over the place during this presentation, but we do a huge variety of things. I get to have my hand in a little bit of all of it. And so wanted to just share kind of that overview of who we are, what the strategy is, and then some of our research and some of the resources that are available for you on our website. So with that, I think I am done with the presentation. So if you have any questions, I believe someone else is going to take over for this part. So.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really informative. I had no idea how much different things that you guys were involved with, so that's great. To our attendees, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the questions section of the webinar dashboard, and we'll give everyone a few minutes. So Stacey, I was just wondering if somebody says, oh, I don't eat beef for environmental reasons. I don't know if you ever hear that at all. What's the best answer that you can tell them?
Yeah, so it's a big question. And I think, and this is just from my experience with some of the media training I've been able to do. My instinct as someone in the science is to, here are 1,000 facts of why you're wrong. And that necessarily doesn't help. And so starting that conversation with common ground, trying to understand what their concerns are. For me, I'm incredibly passionate about native prairie conservation. And so starting, if that's their environmental concern, sharing some of the information around, well, that's actually not how it works on our farm. And we do having cattle on the landscapes actually helps to increase biodiversity. There's been studies showed that when they're grazing, when cattle are grazing, it's actually better for the plant community, better for the animal community as well. And so I think having starting that conversation on common ground and saying, rather than just throwing all the facts at them, because that's my first instinct for sure.
In there, I've definitely done that, and still recovering. Still, the relationship's trying to recover from it.
Right.
Yeah, it can really be a point of tension, and yeah. I just want to note too that you have these amazing kind of infographics with these cute, friendly phrases and really nice pictures. And PCAP has been kind of borrowing them throughout our Prairies Got the Goods week, and probably for the last several years, we've been putting those online too. And I want to encourage everyone to share those infographics. I think it's really useful, and yeah.
Yeah, and they're designed for that exact purpose. Like, never feel afraid to share some of our infographics. We obviously ask that you don't crop out the watermark. But other than that, take them off the website, take them off of social media, share them with your friends, share them in your organizations. That's what they're built for.
Yeah. Sometimes I find that we're kind of preaching to the choir where lots of people who attend our webinars or follow our social media already know, keep the beef, save the habitat. They know that. And so it's really tricky to try to reach out to new audiences. And that's actually kind of how Prairie's Got the Goods we got going, was to try to broaden the horizons and raise awareness with people that may not already know that information. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And that's always the issue, right? It's so easy to talk within our group. I did my yoga teacher training a few years ago, and that was really an eye-opening experience to me, because I was in a completely different group than I normally did, right? And was very pre-opposed to this attitude. I think there were 4 vegans that I did my training with. And so having these conversations with them of just coming from an honest place of understanding, and none of them have changed their mind, and I've thought of things differently and they've thought of things differently. But I think it's, having those conversations, even when they're the hard ones, are important.
hmm And your point about not trying to change minds, but just having the conversation, and that's, yeah, you don't have to change everyone's mind right away.
Mhm.
Um, so we have a question from a listener named Jeff. He says, first of all, thanks for the presentation. That was great. And I'm curious about how much increasing productivity of native and naturalized pastures can actually discourage land conversion. I have a feeling it won't be enough to move the needle on its own. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, there's other things that are going to have to come into place, but ultimately, what we're a research organization, so we have to think of the questions that can be answered with research, not necessarily with policy. And I do think there are some wins that can be made in that area. I think there's a lot of, we've kind of, native prairie management tends to be, we have some of the aspects figured out, but it's kind of just used as, well, that's native prairie, so we just deal with some of the limitations. And there might be ways that we can manage it differently to get more out of it and increase profitability, because although I don't think we'll ever be able to compete with canola prices or things like that, I do think some of those small wins can help people start to think a little differently about their native prairie and about the value it provides to their operation when they are facing these really tough decisions. So I agree. I don't think 100% on its own is going to change the world. But it is the one thing within research that we can control, outside of the broader policy conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer. Um, that's all the questions we have right now. So I'll give everyone, oh, I spoke too soon. um, sorry, a listener named Ross has a question. Oh, they're all coming in now. Look at that. We'll start with Ross's. Um, so given that there is such a focus on soil carbon and the majority of grassland carbon is at depths greater than annual cropping, is BCRC supporting research to better identify carbon stores at depth and capacity of perennial forage systems to provide long-term carbon storage?
Yeah, we are doing a lot in the soil health space, carbon space. I didn't share a lot of it today, just because we're moving into some new stuff that's going to be very exciting. And of course, nobody likes to hear that without the information to back it up. And the projects just aren't full far enough along to give you some good data and good information. That being said, researchers are sneaky in a good way. That many of them have been collecting this carbon data for years and years and years on projects that weren't necessarily about carbon sequestration. And so thankfully, we do have some really good data across Canada on some of our research facilities around, what carbon looks like, or some of the like long-term sampling. And so there are some projects ongoing now where they're looking back at some of that data and really trying to suss out some of the long-term trends, that sort of stuff. And so there's some exciting stuff in the works, not a ton of results yet, which is part of the problem with forage and carbon and soil work is it takes a really long time, unfortunately, for someone as
Yeah,
impatient.
absolutely. And your comment about um, researchers being sneaky, I think lots of researchers do this amazing work and it gets put into a report somewhere. And, that's one of the reasons we do our Native Prairie Speaker Series is so then we can get that awesome information out to the people who could use it. So, yeah. And Caleb is wondering, how often do you get feedback on the accuracy of forage carrying capacity calculator? Have you gotten feedback from producers or land managers or both?
I wouldn't say we've received a ton of feedback. This has only been live for about a year now, and we are doing a big, if this spring you'll see a big video rollout and some more promotion of it as an online tool. We haven't got a ton of feedback. We did work with a lot of people who do kind of the boots on the ground forage measurement type stuff. So it's especially the first method that I showed where you're using estimates. Obviously, it's not going to be 100% accurate, but the few producers that I have talked about that use it, they did feel that it gives them a rough idea of their pasture. It's definitely not, they're not going to use that to say, this is the in date, that is the out date, these 50 cows are going in this pasture. But it does provide one more piece of data to go into that puzzle of figuring it out.
Okay, that's awesome. So our next question is from Jen, and it's a good one. She says, "What about the feedlots? Isn't the answer that eating beef is only good for the native prairie and land and water in general, assuming it's grass finished and circumventing the intensive feedlot part of the chain? Also, if the beef are being finished with corn and grain, then the beef industry is culpable in native prairie conversion, right?" Do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts about that?
this is a huge conversation. And it is, things that we're looking at in terms of the life cycle side. And I think the important thing to remember is some of the trade-offs, right? When you're finishing an animal in a feedlot, yes, it's having negative biodiversity impacts. That's 100% correct. But you're reducing the greenhouse gas emissions immensely because of the way that animal is finished, right? The most greenhouse gas emissions an animal is creating is on pasture. And so I think it's part of a broader conversation where we really need to work together as an industry and recognize that no matter where we're at, there are going to be these trade-offs. And unfortunately, that's just the way the system works, right? And so yeah, it's a big conversation. It's a tough conversation. There's a lot of people at the table with conflicting opinions or theories. But ultimately, I think there's been some great work that's going into some of these life cycle assessments to really understand better what are those trade-offs. And so maybe it's not saying one or the other, but it's providing that informed decision to people of what when you're choosing one product over the other, what are those trade-offs? Because I think it's really easy to say, oh, well, just don't do that, but there are some positives of that as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. Um, do you have any comments for people that are trying to, eat sustainable beef? And I just want to add in, like, I'm really lucky. I live down in Val Marie, and there's often posts on Facebook, quarter beef or ground beef for sale. But I was at a conference about 2 weeks ago now, and I realized that, a lot of people in the city, even who work in the environment or conservation, struggle to find grass-fed beef. Do you have any tips for them?
Yeah, so the biggest one I can say is the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, sorry, has recently come out with a number of indicators. And so those indicators are looking at across the production chain. And like I said, taking into account a lot of these trade-offs. But there is actually, you can find a little like stamp of certified sustainable beef, and it's just starting to roll out. I'm not sure all of the places it's available, but as they increase auditing on farms, because that's the other thing to back up the claims that they're making, that is becoming more and more available on food that, or beef that you can find at the grocery store. I believe Chop Steakhouse is carrying it. I know McDonald's, they do have a portion of their beef is that certified sustainable. So that's a program that's just getting going, but it's been a long time in the making and exciting to see it finally making some gains.
Yeah, yeah, that would be great. In my opinion, it can't roll out fast enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions that we have today. So I just want to thank you again for the great presentation and reiterate some of the comments that are coming in from the attendees. So thank you so much, Stacey. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. This is great, a great audience to speak to. So thank you.
Awesome. And to all of our attendees, when you leave this webinar, there'll be a quick 1-minute survey. If you don't mind filling that out, we really appreciate it. We want to keep our Prairie's Got the Goods week going into the future. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.